today we are going to start getting the Mega Life batteries mounted in the back of the GU for the 24 volt winch and touring system. Matt Kinsella actually helped draw up a battery tray for me. All he did was draw it up in CAD and then gave me the files for it, cut it all out and folded it all up. I'm not sure when this video is going to come out. I still don't have the hoist in, still haven't built my welding stand and still don't have a welding table, but this just got cut out and so I want to tack it up so I can get it in the car and have a look. So Matt has built a fair bit of adjustability in because it's kind of an odd area. You got the sub tank there and then you've got the exhaust. Because obviously I gave him the measurements over the phone. He still allowed a fair bit of adjustability in the mount so that I can, you know, refine it once I got it here. The last thing I need to tack is those into there like that, but I'm just gonna clamp it to this so I know that I'm getting a 90. So I'm going to draw a rough line through the center of these. So I've drilled the holes in here and put all the bolts in, and it's honestly pretty rigid. There's one more attachment at the back just to tie into this upper control arm, but let's put these batteries in. That looks awesome. That's such a good fit. You got the batteries this side, exhaust going through there, and then the sub tank over there. I'm gonna obviously heat wrap this exhaust just to protect these a bit, although with a diesel, it's not like a petrol, like you got nowhere near as much heat coming out of that exhaust, but still, we'll wrap that up. They seem pretty sturdy in there, so yeah, I've got a pretty big day tomorrow. I've got Harris coming over to do all the new lights and power points and stuff in here, ready for the hoist to go in. And so I'm gonna call it a night on this job, and then we can start running some wiring. Since last clip you saw, I have given this a lick of paint and it's pretty much ready to bolt in and get the batteries in, so I might do that now. Alright, so I wasn't quite sure how I was going to secure these batteries down, and then I had a bit of an idea because Matt had included a hole in the center. So then I thought I could put a riv nut in the bottom of that and then a riv nut either side, and then just have some of this threaded rod and then have this go over the top like that, and then have a nut on each one and secure the batteries down that way. I thought that would look pretty neat. Okay, so let's have a bit of a talk about this system before I go wiring anything up. So if you've been watching my content for a little while, you'll know that in the GQ, I run the EnerDrive DC to DC, and that takes in 12 volt from my car. And then the EnerDrive DC to DC charges my rear batteries at 24 volt. That powers my entire touring setup and my winch. And to this day, that EnerDrive rules. As I've explained before with other things like winches, for example, I'm just the type of person that likes to try different brands and different products. And so this time I've decided to go with the Red Arc version. This is not sponsored or anything. I bought all this gear myself. Now, I haven't had a chance to use it yet, but I've got a good history with Red Arc products. So far, from what I can understand, this beats the EnerDrive in one way, and that is that this is IP rated, so it can be mounted in the engine bay, around heat, around dust, around water, and it's gonna be fine, like most of Red Arc's products, whereas the EnerDrive is not dust and waterproof. The EnerDrive also has a pretty noisy fan, whereas this thing, I believe, is fully solid state. There's no moving parts in it. But where the EnerDrive beats this is the EnerDrive is adjustable, so you can change it between 5, 10, 20 or 30 amps, but this is set at 20 amps. That isn't a big deal because I keep my EnerDrive one permanently at 20 anyway. And the EnerDrive unit can also do any type of battery, whereas Red Arc have two different products depending on what battery you have. This is the Life PO4 one. If you've got AGM or lead acid, then you've got to use a different unit. And then the last thing where EnerDrive beats this one is the EnerDrive can take on solar as is, whereas the Red Arc one, you actually need to use a separate relay so that when you turn the ignition off, it switches over to a solar supply instead of the ignition supply. Whereas again, the EnerDrive one does that all on board as is. So is that a deal breaker? Nah, absolutely not. That's why I got it and that's why I wanted to try it. The EnerDrive in the GQ was a sponsored product. I probably could have quite easily went that again, but as I say, just from the nature of how I like to do things, I'm trying something different. Running this relay isn't a big issue because I tend to run a relay anyway, because if you don't run a relay, then this tends to stay on charging the rear until your front battery gets all the way down to 12.8. Whereas when I turn the ignition off, I kind of like to know that this is disconnecting straight up so as not to drain my crank battery. That aside, how does this work? So in order to charge my 24 volt batteries at 20 amp, it's got to be drawing 40 amp at 12 volt. And so that brings me on to the cable. So this here is rated at 50 amp. That's going to be the cable that is going from my vehicle's battery system to the DC to DC at 40 amp 12 volt. And then this cable can be a lot smaller, rated at 30 amp, because even though it's going to be charging at 24 volt, wire only really cares about amps, and it's only going to be 20 amps by the time it converts to 24 volt, and so this is only rated to 30. From the front battery to the DC to DC, then we go from the DC to DC through this cable to the rear batteries via this relay here. And so then I've just got some other bits and bobs like battery terminals and then MIDI fuses. I think it's about time I stop yapping and we start wiring some stuff up. And so as you just saw there, I was making this line here, and this is going to change this from two 12 volt batteries to one 24 volt battery. And all we do, take one of the negatives off, one of the positives off. And just like that, we have 24 volt. It's a cold one in Tassie. I've actually got the fire going tonight. To catch you up with where we're at in time, the hoist went in today. That video would have went out a fortnight ago. So as you would have seen now, I've finished getting the batteries mounted into the tray, and I think I'm going to start from this end and move my way back. This car actually already had a red arc DC to DC in it. And so the last DC to DC used to be mounted right here. I don't really see a reason why it can't go back there again. If I don't think of a reason, then I reckon that's where it'll go.
Been at it already, had my tarot read. Things are looking up for me, that's what my tarot said. Been pumping out pheromones and wearing red. Young Jerry Lawler, a king, but they're not aware of it. $40 to show money, that's what they stole.
Last night, I wasn't really making much sense of it. It's too late. I've come back again tonight with a clear head. And I'm just making up the wires to go from this side over to that side. These crimpers are really awkward to use. They do a really nice crimp, but super awkward to use.
Turning fans into zealots, tuning in when I tell it. There were 15 people at the gig, saying, oh my God, what fun is it?
I don't really know how I'm going to show you all of this because it is such a mess. These wires are going to go from this battery into a relay, out of a relay, into the DC to DC, and then out of the DC to DC down to the 24 volt. And so it's honestly just going to look like I'm just doing the same crap over and over and over again. And so I might just like show you guys the important bits, and we'll keep it moving.
Right, always, all days, all nights, seem do I.
Alright, so I'm going to connect all this up. I'm not going to put the MIDI fuse in yet, just saves me shorting out crap accidentally on the other side. Power connected and fused on this side. Now I'm just going to take this wire and cable tie it really neatly across the firewall.
With the lonely hearts, watching all these little men try and be Bonapartes and make the rest of us deal with their broken parts. Despite evil, I like people. Put your hands in the air if you're bipedal. Yeah, if life is a film, give me 5 sequels. Trying to pull my thread through the plot like a fine needle. All of these lines equal.
We've got the ground and power coming from our start battery. One's going to go to the common point where it's going to meet with the relay. And one's going to go to our grounding point where everything's going to ground. So this is going to ground, and then the DC to DC is all going to ground in the one spot to the one bolt. I've got a lot of it wired up. I might wrap it up for the night and come back and have another look at it in the morning. Okay, so this ended up totally different to what you saw in those clips. And I'll do like a diagram or a picture on the screen to show you why this was so complicated and why it took me a few goes to get it right. This isn't as simple as the Enerdrive where you just have wires coming from the battery and ring terminals. The Red Arc operates a little bit differently. And for this reason, I actually like the Enerdrive better. The Enerdrive comes, so you've just got a bunch of studs on it with ring terminals on your wires that you just go to each stud. There's positive and negative studs for your front input. There's positive and negative studs for your rear output. There's positive and negative studs for solar. And then there's a stud for ignition if you want to use ignition. Now with the Red Arc, number one, it doesn't have solar input. You've got to use a separate relay, which basically takes the key signal and decides whether to charge it from solar or the car. So when the car's running, it's charging from alternator. When the car's off, it switches over and charges from solar. And then the other thing is, instead of having like neat studs to send your wires to, it's just got a branch of wires out the back of it, and you've got to crimp or Anderson plug or do whatever you're going to do to connect your wires to it, which I don't really like. The other spanner in the works is the fact that this car has got 2 crank batteries. Now, they're overkill. I don't need 2 crank batteries until I can come up with another purpose for that spot in the engine bay. I may as well just have it there. And so that adds another little spanner in the works because I want those batteries separated when the car's off. So when the car's on, I want them behaving like one big 12-volt battery. When the car's off, I want them split. And so for that, I need an isolator. And so in the GQ system, it's just the Enerdrive DC to DC taking charge from my 12-volt, making it 24-volt and charging the rear bank. In this system, I've got 2 crank batteries that need a split when the car's off. I've also got the Red Arc relay that chooses between alternator and solar, whether the car's on or off. And then I've got the DC to DC, which is responsible for taking 12 volt and sending it back to the 24 volt bank. Now, saying all that, to try and do all that and keep it neat in the engine bay was very, very difficult. And so I'll show you how I did that. And so starting from here, you've got my main crank battery. This goes down to the normal factory ground. And then this is an extra ground I've added to compensate for the extra power that we're taking over there. And then on the positive side, I've got this little linking line here that goes to a little circuit breaker. And then that goes from a power cable that goes over here and across the firewall with an ignition source. To think about that a little bit easier, all we've done is extended the positive post of this battery over to there. And so that power comes over the firewall and then comes to this red arc isolator. That red arc isolator is just responsible for splitting my two 12 volt crank batteries when the car's off. The second thing that it does is it gives us a bulkhead terminal, which is just a stud with a nut on it to get positive for the relay. And so that is a nice, neat way to grab power for the relay and DC to DC without having to have a crimped terminal. All it is, if you think about it, is an extended battery terminal for the positive of the other battery. And then all this relay does is splits between solar or alternator in terms of power to give this unit, so this unit can charge the 24 volt batteries. And so put very simply, these are my car's crank batteries and 12 volt batteries. They are connected when the car's running. They are disconnected when the car's off, so they don't fight each other if the car sits a while. And then this relay here is responsible for deciding whether the DC to DC gets alternator or solar, because I wanted it to be neat at the end of the day. After all, this car is going to be doing remote touring as well as remote hard wheeling. If there's a short, I want it to be able to fuse, and if there's any issues, I want to be able to diagnose them quickly. And so yeah, that's that. Let's move on to sending power down to the rear. Alright, so I've got to chuck an Anderson plug on one end of this in order to plug it into the charger. And so because they're so small, I reckon I'll just like heat it up with a blowtorch and then plunge it in. Just with them being so small, I'm going to double them over like that. Get a set of vice grips. Now, because the exhaust is on this side, the old owner actually had wires running down up against the floor here, and then by the time you get to here, you meet up with actual OEM wiring. He's actually got a couple of holes here where he had P-clamps screwed to the floor, and so I might actually reuse those and run it in the same spot that he had the last wiring. Alrighty, let's come down. The only other thing I've got to do is add an earth for the bank at the back here, but I'm going to make that out of 120. We'll get this back down and we'll terminate these ready to go on the battery. Alrighty, so I've terminated the main power supply. The reason I haven't gone to the main lugs is I kind of want to reserve them for the actual winch lines. Like I want them to have a really good connection with plenty of post. And so I've just gone to the side nuts here for the charging. And then this here, it's just going to get a couple of blue crimp terminals because that's just for the gauge and the power supply for the cab for just if I need power there at some stage. But yeah, for now it's just for a gauge, so that can get two little blue crimps. Okay, so I've got this little piece that goes in the dash and I'm going to drill a hole in it so I can put my volt gauge in it. I'll go and chuck that back in the car and hook these on. So the last thing to do is to put the fuses in. So for this one, I don't have a fuse, I've just got a breaker. So we're gonna connect that up. So that gives power from my car to the DC to DC. And then for the fuse back here, I've just got a little MIDI fuse. And so that is 30 amp because the red arc is going to be giving this 20 at 24. You got to be really careful with 24, it gives you a hell of a zap. One other thing that's probably worth mentioning is this is the balancer that Mega Life sent me with these batteries. And that's purpose is to just make sure that these batteries drain evenly. Particularly with the lithium, it's probably a good idea to have them balanced. And so yeah, I might have a bit of a clean up, have some lunch, and then we'll take it for a drive. Alright, I don't know how clearly that's showing on my phone, but you can see that's charging now at 27.2. So yeah, the next thing is obviously going to be getting the winch all set up, and then that's pretty much job done. Kistler warned me that once I went 24 volt, I'll never go back, and now I've got 24 volt in both cars. But yeah, it's way better, heaps more efficient, better for the winch, better for everything. Oh yeah, alright, I'm going to cruise on home. So just because I don't have the canopy just yet, I thought I'd come out and make sure that the solar was charging. And so I've just got like the solar panel plugged into the Anderson that I've got there. And it looks like the red arc is charging, so that's good. So I was actually going to wrap up the video with the winch running on the front of this car, but I have a few things in the works which might involve Cam from Roadrunner twisting my arm into a bigger, better winch, which will dictate the size of cable that I'll need to run at the front. So until I've worked out what I'm going to do with the winch at the front of this thing, I don't want to run cable yet. The Warn on the GQ is also getting a little bit of a birthday. I've got some things in the works there that are on their way, and that should see the speed of that thing increase by up to like 50%, so that's really cool. I also want to say a massive thanks to Mega Life for supporting me. They looked after me with these batteries, and I'm really keen to test them out. I know I mentioned it in a previous video, but these things have up to like 1600 cranking amps, which is huge, and it should be healthy for pretty much any winch and any motor that I want to bolt to the front of this thing. I've missed lithium. It is so much better, especially for touring. They stay at 13.5 more or less from charged all the way to flat. You might notice that I am filming this back on a phone because I actually had to send my real camera back to get it fixed. The input jack on it is only recording on one channel, which is apparently pretty common for the Sony a7 IIIs. So yeah, you'll have to just bear with me for a moment because I don't want to stop filming, so I'll just use my phone in the meantime. At least I can still use the decent mics with this. But yeah, thanks heaps for watching, and you may have noticed that I've got a really good looking winch here because on my Instagram story, I asked if you wanted to see another 8274 build, and it was a resounding yes, and so this is what we're building next fortnight, so tune in for that. Thank you very much, guys. I'm having so much fun making these videos. The shed video, I had so much positive comments, and so I just wanted to say a huge thank you once again. See you guys in a fortnight. We're building that.